Two staff revealed a box, inside of which gleamed a bunch of luminous gems. Number 76 explained in a hushed tone that they called this the magic stone because it was said to come from the demon's camp. Seeing York's surprise, number 76 immediately deduced that it was York's first visit. She reassured York not to worry, this was just a means of showcasing the capabilities of the exhibition. York took the opportunity to put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. He asked if she was also one of the means. The woman seductively gazed at York and replied that even after the exhibition, she would still be at his service. York was starting to like this place. Shifting his gaze to the stage, 2 rounds of the auction had passed, and he hadn't even paid attention to what was being sold. This time, a girl was brought up to the stage, and the male host announced loudly that she was a refugee from the kingdom of Wolfheart, also a witch, who was capable of using the demon's power to heal herself. Seeing the beautiful witch, the merchants in the audience continuously raised their bids, and the price quickly reached 1,000 gold. York clenched his teeth, but didn't immediately raise his bid, remembering what Otto had said about the invitation card being used as currency. But how much was it really worth? Soon, the price went up to 1260, and the bidding gradually stabilized. York knew that if he didn't speak up now, he would miss out on the witch. He gritted his teeth and said, 2,000. Number 76 immediately raised her right hand and shouted, 2,000. The crowd erupted with new offers, going 300 higher than York's bid. Looking at the man who had raised the bid, he realized that the man's client must be a woman. York couldn't understand why a woman was so eager to acquire the witch. Number 76 asked if he wanted to raise the bid further. At this point, York decided to go all in and doubled the bid. 4,000, shouted number 76, raising her hand high. The host's leisurely tone was unbearably nerve-wracking for York. He almost wished he could rush the stage and slam the gavel himself to finalize the bid. Fortunately, there were no more bids. York exhaled in relief and reclined on the bench, feeling his back was soaked with sweat from the tension. Number 76 came over to congratulate York on acquiring the witch. Following number 76 out of the exhibition, they arrived at a small hole in the sidewall. With no one around, York asked in a low voice how to make the payment. Number 76 smiled and replied that once York confirmed the item was unharmed, he could just hand over the invitation, and in the meantime, he was welcome to enjoy any of their entertainment facilities. Entering a secret room, York saw the witch he had just bid on. Her hands were bound behind her back, and her mouth was wrapped with cloth. She was visibly terrified when she saw York and began to struggle frantically. York asked number 76 to leave the room before approaching the witch and pulling the cloth from her mouth. The girl asked who York was. He told her he was there to rescue her. The girl's name was Amy, and she questioned why York wouldn't release her if he was indeed there to save her. York, fearing that she might run away, explained with a smile that if she was taken again, he wouldn't have another 4,000 gold to save her again. He asked Amy to stay as she was to avoid suspicion, assuring her that he would find an opportunity to give her freedom. Before leaving, he promised to take her to a place filled with companions like her, where she wouldn't have to hide or be hungry anymore. York entered another room trying to find number 76. He tentatively called out her name, but there was no response. Although unsure of what had transpired outside, York was certain it was nothing good. Suddenly, someone walked in. Without hesitation, York knelt on the ground, crying out for mercy. But the person didn't pause and charged straight toward him. At that moment, Amy shouted, "Annie, no!" York turned to see a red-haired woman standing behind him. Then he was abruptly grabbed by a large hand, hoisted up, and slammed onto the ground. Annie asked Amy if York had done anything to her. Amy shook her head, telling Annie that York had claimed he was there to rescue her. Annie scoffed, suggesting Amy had been deceived again, and expertly bound York's hands behind his back, stating that no one would spend 4,000 gold for a witch they didn't know. York realized that this woman must have been the one bidding against him. York insisted he wasn't lying, proclaiming himself an emissary of Grey Castle, and that rescuing the witch was the king's command. While Annie pondered, York hurriedly mentioned that the current king was Roland Wimbledon, hoping the name would resonate with her as someone known to be kind to witches. He recounted all that Roland had done for witches in the Western Territory. Annie seemed to consider this, but then asked why York had not freed Amy. York explained that if Amy didn't trust him and decided to flee, she would be in great danger if recaptured. Annie smirked, suggesting that perhaps York intended to deliver Amy to the king of Grey Castle. York retorted that he intended to take Amy to a safe place, where witches lived as equals among others and had their own organization. Hearing this, Annie shouted for him to be silent. Remembering the blood fawn, her voice turned cold. They had made similar promises before. York paused, sensing trouble. Annie placed York on the bed and told Amy that witches could only trust themselves, not the promises of nobles. Then, she dragged the unconscious number 76 into the room and shackled her to York. Seeing that Annie didn't seem intent on killing them, York's courage grew. He complied quietly with Annie's actions, making a final plea for them to consider going to Grey Castle. Annie remained unmoved, stating that their lives were spared out of respect for the Grey Castle King's victory over the church. She then turned and left. York warned them of the many guards outside, but Annie assured him she had her own ways. The last words from York were telling the two could still seek his help for any future troubles they might encounter. Annie gave him one last look before departing. York thought, perhaps this was for the best. He had done all he could. Looking at number 76 beside him, he thought wryly that there would be no romantic escapades tonight. With a tug of his mouth, he pulled a blanket over them with his teeth and settled down to sleep. Upon waking in a large room the next day, York was immediately visited by Otto, who had heard the news and hurried over to inquire about York's well-being. York, dissatisfied, pointed out that he was almost killed due to Otto's negligence. Aware of what had transpired, Otto appeared very uneasy and quickly apologized, offering compensation. York thought for a moment and decided to take this opportunity to discuss purchasing number 76 later today. As they were talking, the door opened, and a middle-aged man entered. He was the person in charge of the exhibition and first expressed his apologies for York's ordeal, also expressing relief that York was unharmed. The manager reported that, according to their investigation, the incident had been premeditated and 2 other witches had also been abducted. However, he assured York that once the witches were found, he would be immediately notified. York instructed the manager to return the witches to him after their capture and not to hand them over to anyone else. The manager understood. York coughed twice before inquiring about number 76's condition. The manager sternly stated that she would be punished for failing to protect her guest, which disqualified her from her role as a guide. Hearing this, York immediately asked if he could purchase number 76. The manager hesitated, remarking that she was no longer a guide. York didn't respond but simply offered 500 gold to be paid with the invitation. Otto, surprised, exclaimed, "What guide?" York pressed Otto's hand, signaling him not to ask further. After a moment of consideration, the manager agreed, saying he would gift number 76 to York. York was momentarily stunned, then felt pleased. The manager explained that since the incident had caused harm to York, allowing him to decide her fate was the best choice. They were willing to offer number 76 as compensation for the unfortunate events. An elderly man, supported by a servant, made his way to the depths of a cave, his steps labored and slow. Reflecting on his life, he remembered taking over the family business from his father at the age of 20, building the Commerce Guild to its current stage. But as the guild grew, its foundations became perilously unstable. He worried whether, after his passing, people would still be content to stay in their current positions. He doubted his sons could keep them in line. His body no longer possessed the vigor of his younger times. He arrived at a stone door, where the air grew damp, and the ground was covered in water. The old man instructed the servant to leave him there. He would go on alone for this final stretch. As he left the cave's entrance, he moved cautiously towards the center of the cavern, where a mist began to rise around him. Upon reaching a large chamber with 2 guards and a bridge, the guards acknowledged the old man, stating that the messenger had been waiting for him. Without even a moment to catch his breath, the guards turned and walked on, leaving no room for complaints. The old man took a deep breath and followed them. Approaching the center, each of them held a massive magic stone, beginning the summons for the so-claimed messenger of gods. The magic stones quickly dimmed, and soon a purple light rose from the ground, transforming the darkness into a different scene. The purple light coalesced into a giant heart. The three men knelt, and the heart's words resonated directly in the old man's consciousness. A voice of unknown gender asked the old man to report on the situation above. The old man spoke of the unexpected turn of events, expressing his surprise that the witches had not accepted the invitation from the Grey Castle ambassador and that the witches' vigilance was stronger than anticipated. The messenger did not blame the old man but simply inquired about possible remedial measures. The old man, bowing his head, suggested that they could force the witches to accept the invitation, perhaps by leveraging the new policies of the new king of Kingdom of Dawn. The messenger made a sound of disdain, clearly dissatisfied with the policy of eradicating and harming witches. The old man was at a loss for words. He knew this plan could not only hurt the witches but might also lead to their deaths, yet he dared not voice this thought. The messenger's voice rose in pitch, reminding the old man of the importance of every witch before the impending doomsday. The old man almost forgot the messenger could read his thoughts. He prostrated himself. He would do his best while repeatedly bowing and explaining his lack of manpower. The messenger moderated its tone, offering the assistance of its own guards to the old man. When asked how long it would take, the old man assured that he only needed 2 weeks to advance to the third phase of the plan. The messenger agreed. Finally, the old man asked the question that weighed most heavily on his mind: were the witches truly that important? Did the gods truly only favor them? If it were a matter of wealth or power, he felt he would be more suitable. But before he could finish, the messenger interrupted him with a cold laugh, informing the old man that he did not comprehend the gravity of his words. Neither wealth nor power held any significance in the face of the looming apocalypse. The gods sought a savior capable of wielding their immense power, not a mundane spokesperson. The old man would be granted a healthy body as a reward, but he was to understand his place. Despite his lingering dissatisfaction, the old man was aware of the prophecies concerning the apocalypse. The messenger had told him repeatedly that no one knew who the chosen one was, but they must continue to search and try, and the messenger had been endeavoring for hundreds of years to find them. As the old man prepared to take his leave, the messenger fell silent for a moment before asking if the church had indeed fallen. The old man nodded, confirming that he had sent many people to investigate, and they all reported back saying they were defeated by the king of Grey Castle, and all they left was an empty land trampled by a horde of demonic beasts. Perhaps this was their end? The voice of the messenger suddenly became soft, almost sorrowful. The old man was puzzled, but the messenger quickly returned to its usual demeanor, concluding the day's conversation, and the giant heart disappeared. The old man bowed respectfully and was given a porcelain bottle by the guard. It contained a medicine awarded by the messenger. He drank it immediately, and a warm, burning sensation rose within him, restoring his strength. His limbs felt more agile than they had in years. He reflected on how, 3 years prior, he had needed a servant to push his wheelchair, then he had progressed to standing and walking, and now his body was filled with vitality again. As long as he continued to fulfill the messenger's wishes, perhaps one day, he might indeed achieve immortality. Back in Neverwinter, Roland poured himself a cup of tea, then served one to Nightingale, who lounged comfortably in a recliner, pinching a strip of fish jerky. Nightingale blew on the steam and asked Roland for a cube of sugar. After her conversation with Anna, Nightingale had disappeared for 2 days, and upon her return, she seemed to have shed a heavy burden, reverting to her carefree demeanor. Her face was often adorned with an irrepressible smile as she held a storybook, engrossed in the reading. Eventually, unable to contain his curiosity, Roland asked Nightingale what exactly Anna had said to her that day. With a swift movement, she appeared beside him, her laughter indicating a secret she would not share. Nightingale looked at Roland and suddenly thanked him for expressing her wishes to Anna. In the evening, Roland headed to the workshop on the northern slope, the site of the first Bessemer converter steel mill. Anna used her abilities to start the fire, and soon, the molten iron in the furnace glowed red hot. Roland directed the workers to insert the tuyere into the furnace. The steel pipe was connected at the other end to a coated hose, leading to a steam engine-driven exhaust system. As oxygen-rich air was drawn into the converter, a torrent of flames burst from the mouth of the furnace, sending a shower of orange sparks into the air, to the workers' amazement. Facing the blast of heat, Roland felt an immense sense of satisfaction. These sparks symbolized humanity's stride into a new era. For now, he had to make do with air to refine steel, but when they could switch to pure oxygen in the future, the flames would shine even brighter and more resplendent. Settling the affairs of Neverwinter, it was time for Roland to return to the dream world. There, it was a sunny summer morning, and his phone was brimming with unread messages. Checking the messages, he found inquiries about whether he still had armor for sale. With his finances now comfortable, Roland decided not to continue selling. He glanced towards Zero's room, noting that she hadn't woken up yet. Not wanting to wait for the young girl to prepare breakfast, Roland went downstairs and found a noodle shop nestled in an alley to settle into. As he ate his noodles and gazed out the window, his attention was captured by a pair of long legs. A woman was running down the alley. It was Garcia, dressed in casual athletic wear that showcased her legs, her hair tied up, and a towel hanging around her neck. To his surprise, the people in the alley all turned their eyes toward her. Many even whistled, their excitement palpable as if they were witnessing a celebrity. The surrounding chatter was astonishing to Roland. The residents seemed familiar with Garcia, mentioning something about a competition. It was then that the shop owner approached, recognizing that Roland was unaware of who Garcia was. The shop owner explained that Garcia was a martial fighter, and it was because of her that everyone in the area could continue living their lives peacefully. Confused, Roland looked where the owner pointed and saw a big character for demolish on the wall. The owner sighed, saying that a development company had planned to demolish the area to build skyscrapers, and if Garcia hadn't exposed the issue on television, they might have faced forced demolition by now. Roland wasn't sure what to say, and the owner laughed, saying that's why everyone supported Garcia. He suggested that since Roland was new, he would eventually become one of Garcia's fans as well. After Roland paid and left, he reflected on the wall. Even though dreams sometimes used incredible forces to piece together disparate fragments, this still seemed quite unbelievable. He wondered whether he was the real master of this dream world, but thinking that for him to be able to live here all thanks to Garcia made it quite ridiculous. With a mind full of questions, Roland returned to his room, where Zero had just sleepily emerged from her bedroom. He handed over the breakfast he had bought for her. Zero, puzzled, sat down at the table, not understanding why her uncle was getting up earlier and earlier. Roland explained that he had work now, so he couldn't sleep in, and they wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. Seeing Zero's excitement as she ate her breakfast, Roland asked if she knew Garcia. Zero became excited, explaining that Sister Garcia was a prodigy who had joined the Martial Fighter Association at the age of 20 and had never been defeated. Roland was curious about the so-called Martial Fighter Association, but Zero glanced at him and said that only those with awakened abilities could become martial fighters, and it required perseverance and determination, otherwise the person would be devoured by the power. She playfully told her uncle not to get any unrealistic ideas. Zero tidied up and shouldered her backpack, ready for school. After Zero left, Roland stretched out his hand, focusing on that strange power within him. The notion of being devoured by the power reminded him of the witch's magic backlash. How was this world governed by such rules as well? He turned on the TV to a program explaining the martial fighting competition, which seemed different from traditional combat sports. The fighters wore no protective gear, exchanging raw, unguarded blows that could draw blood at any moment. Their speed and strength surpassed that of ordinary people. What surprised Roland even more was the sight of a demon among the competitors, something the audience took as entirely normal. As Roland immersed himself in the peculiarities of this dream world, he was startled by the grumbling of his stomach and the realization that the sun was nearly set, and Zero had not yet returned home. Just as he was about to go downstairs to buy something to eat, an urgent news report about a knife robbery on a street caught his attention, the very street Zero took to school. A heavy dread settled in Roland's heart. What would happen to this world if something happened to Zero? He rushed out towards the scene of the crime, where thankfully, the perpetrator had already been apprehended. Roland approached a narrow alley, guided by a voice that seemed to be calling for help. Even knowing his actions were to the typical horror movie scenarios where the protagonist makes a foolish move. Upon arrival, he saw a man standing with his back turned, alone. The man did not respond to Roland's approach but instead twisted his head around 180 degrees in a chillingly unnatural motion, which made Roland gasp in horror. The man's forehead had a swirling vortex of a red mist. He looked at Roland with a cold gaze and questioned if Roland was a martial fighter. Roland was confused, but said he was not. Got the answer he was looking for, the man slowly approached. Roland was not scared, rather he asked if the man was a victim of backlash from the power. The man scoffed disdainfully, not answering Roland's question, but rather started laughing while declaring that everyone knew nothing of where this power came from or its true nature. The man claimed to be able to feel power while saying the power didn't belong to this world but rather a gift from the gods. He twisted his body and slowly walked towards Roland. He had hoped the armed robbery would lure one or two martial fighters, but seeing Roland here isn't too bad either. Before the man could finish, Roland struck out. His punch landed on the man's nose with lightning speed and tremendous force, sending the man flying. The man looked at Roland, bewildered. He thought Roland said he wasn't a martial fighter. Ignoring the man's protests, Roland kicked the man a few times, releasing the frustration of the earlier sudden scare. Roland then reached out to the red mist on the man's head and snatched it. The vortex transported onto Roland's hand and shifted from deep red to a brilliant hue of inner white vortex. Then, a beam of golden light shot out toward the sky, and Roland felt a sudden change within him. He couldn't articulate the nature of this transformation, but he was certain this world had many more secrets than he had ever imagined. Back at his unit, before Roland could even turn the doorknob, hurried footsteps sounded from the other side. Zero flung open the door with furrowed brows, her eyes filled with a mix of shock and a trace of anxiety. They both asked where the other had been. Zero was first to speak, explained that her class had run late, and then asked where Roland had gone. Roland replied that he had gone out looking for her because Zero hadn't returned on time. Zero was somewhat surprised by the response. Roland chuckled and affectionately ruffled her hair as he stepped inside. He expressed his worry about Zero not returning home as expected. They settled at the table where dinner was already prepared. With Zero having a day off tomorrow, Roland proposed a trip to the library, which didn't quite thrill Zero. She didn't fancy spending her rare holiday among books. Roland smiled and offered to take her shopping for new clothes, which brightened her mood, and she agreed to the plan.